even the MacBook Pro is not Pro. I mean, I think nobody would deny that there will be the next generation and the generation after that, and they will get faster and faster and faster. But
yes,
I would have to say, given what I've seen in the benchmarks, even given the performance with admittedly only 16 gigs of RAM, that this MacBook Pro, for instance, outperformed the Mac Pro in some cases.
Almost, yeah. So the big constraint is going to be ports, I think, for people who are legitimate Pro users, because you just can't, without a hub.
Get a freaking dock then.
Yeah, no, that's totally. But the thing with the RAM is, like, the machines these replaced only had 16 gigabytes. And Apple was really good. They did memory compression, they did ultra fast swap. But now you have a unified memory pool, which operates completely differently than a traditional VRAM and DRAM system. You're not copying things back and forth. Everything is instantly available. It's a pool, and we're going to have to reconceptualize how we talk about RAM on a. Like, it's like talking about it on an iPad now. It's not like talking about it on a traditional PC.
That was my bet, and I still haven't used it. My MacBook Pro 13 comes on Friday, but that was my bet, was that you shouldn't compare 16 gigs of RAM on this device to an Intel device, especially because of the unified memory architecture. Panzerino even goes so far as to say, I think Apple might phase out the notion of RAM entirely, and you might have some sort of shared storage / RAM, some sort of Optane. Wouldn't be Optane.
It's like an IBM dream for years, right? Like, they've been trying to patent and sell that for years, but it could be possible.
So you might have, up to 2 terabytes of RAM, let's say, except that it's RAM plus storage, and because it's on chip, it's all equally fast. I mean, I just want to say, my guess was at this, even before the announcement last week, but at the announcement for sure, that this was an inflection point in desktop computing. That everything was going to be kind of before Apple Silicon and after Apple Silicon. And I don't see anything at all to doubt that assessment. This is... Now, Andy, you pointed out that a number of the Intel fanboys on YouTube and elsewhere, Louis Rossmann, people like that, are saying, what is their complaint?
A lot of their complaint is that I think they took umbrage at hey, this is faster than 98% of all Windows laptops released in the past year. And yeah, that's marketing lingo, but they didn't really focus on the actual performance of this actual thing. They're also complaining about RAM expandability, but they're also complaining about the GPU performance is not going to be as good as a dedicated GPU.
Well, wait a minute, because they obviously hadn't benchmarked it yet.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, but really, to sum up, a lot of this really sounds familiar to the first Mac that was released and the first iPad that was released, where they're trying to compare it to a stand. They're trying to compare it to the architecture and the sort of devices that they're used to, when it's really, really becoming clear that Apple didn't just swap from one processor to another. They reinvented the Mac from the ground up. And so there is going to be, as people continue to use these things, they're certainly going to be able to find, I'm sure, or rather, I have to believe, despite all immediate evidence, that they're going to find areas in which this new M1 CPU is not the one ring to rule them all. But the thing is, as you say, it feels more like an iPad because it was designed more like an iPad, not just a CPU swap.
I don't like the feels more like an iPad because that implies that somehow it's less than desktop computing. This is
instantaneous though. Like the iPad is so responsive. Like, to me, that's the thing. Whenever somebody says, "I wish I had like Final Cut Pro on the iPad," I try to figure out what do they actually mean. And there's a responsiveness and immediacy and instantaneousness to the iPad. Like, you press something, it happens. You're never waiting. It never feels like it's beach balling. It feels like it's doing exactly what you want the second your fingers touch it. And for the first time, that's what these Macs feel like. And it's not just that, like, yes, the performance is outlandish. The battery life, I ran all my benchmarks on battery, and the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro were down to like 68 and 70%, and the Intel ones were like 27% and 40%. But beyond even that, it just felt like I was getting slices of my life back. Like just using Final Cut without every time I go over a plugin, it spins. Without every time I go over something, it stops to render. Without it having to load and like, it was like getting seconds and minutes of my life back, and I was just smiling the whole time.
Lori, can you hold your breath and wait?
So I'm thinking about things like, World of Warcraft just recently announced that they are
Native,
already set up
out of
for,
the box.
Yeah.
And it made me think of things like, everybody knows that Macs aren't meant for gaming, but now I'm starting to think maybe Macs can be meant for gaming right now, and maybe this is opening up a whole new world in terms of what is possible on a Mac and whether or not people would be interested in playing games on a Mac. And a lot of it has been limitations in what the Mac could do in terms of a dedicated GPU and things like that. So I don't know. It seems it's crazy.
Single-threaded performance better than almost anything, including
maybe Ryzen 3. Maybe Ryzen 3.
Yeah, I mean, just even for mobile, this is a killer. But even for not mobile, for desktop, this is a killer.
The WebKit render speeds were ridiculous.
Multi-threading is also very strong. Multi-core is very strong. And I think the GPUs are stronger than people thought too. Has that been your experience, Renee?
Yeah, I mean, so
certainly better than any other integrated graphics. I mean, if you're
that's what I was going to say. Like compared
Iris,
to Intel, yeah, it's like it runs laps around it, then goes and does calisthenics in the middle of the field while it's waiting for the Intel ones to finish. Like some people are like, well, you didn't compare it to RDNA 2, you didn't compare it to Ampere. Yeah. And it makes me want to do a wellness check for r/hardware at that point, because those are like $1,000 cards with literally the Shield helicarrier as their ventilation, and those are 300 watts of power draw. This is literally a low power system, and it's doing performance that no longer makes you regret. It's like the MacBook Air just feels like you're not making any compromises anymore, and with zero fan, and that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, let's not overlook the fact that oftentimes when they're benchmarking these systems against AMD and Intel devices, they're talking about $1,500, $2,000 builds. These are the machines that have historically been the low end of Macs, with the exception of the MacBook Pro. The entry level Mac has been the Mac Mini. The entry level MacBook has been the MacBook Air, and Apple is delivering revolutionary leaps in speed at this low end. So it's a great boon for people who are in the budget to moderate price range, but it also kind of gets you all tingly inside thinking about what happens when they really, really, really want to say, well, what if we put 4 fans in it and put a 1,000-watt power supply in it and make it a tower? How fast can we make it then? It's an exciting time to be a Mac fan.
And people were saying, oh, it's a first generation. It's important to point out that Apple has been building their own chips since 2007 with the iPhone. They acquired PA Semiconductor shortly after that, which was a chip manufacturing design company. They have more than 1,000 engineers, and they've been doing this for more than 10 years. So this isn't really the first Apple chip. This is just the first Apple chip in a Mac.
It does have a little bit of weight to it, because I do get the impression that they designed a chip that was kind of ideal for the MacBook Air, and then they also put it in the Mac Mini and the MacBook Pro. The only thing that I'm disappointed with, as you were saying earlier, is that I believe you would think that maybe the I/O of this chip is kind of limited, because look at the back of the Mac Mini. There is so much space to put more stuff.
Yeah.
And the fact that they can put, admittedly, 2 channels of super fast Thunderbolt there, that's really good, but nonetheless, you would like to not have to buy a $250 dock in order to just plug in my webcam and my keyboard and my mouse.
Well, I'm sure they'll solve this in later versions.
Oh, absolutely.
This is on the SoC. There's only 2 Thunderbolt 4/USB 4.
Right.
Really fast ones, though.
They're fast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's only 2 of them, and there's only enough space for 16 gigs of RAM. But presumably that will be solved in later generations.
Yeah. That's first generation, for heaven's sake. What a great explosion out the gate.
But I almost don't want to say, oh, but it's, I don't want to say it's iPad-like or, oh, it's just first generation, because I think, yes, if in the back of your head you say, wow, they've done this in the first generation, what's the next generation going to look like? Mm-hmm. That's fine. But I think that diminishes it somehow, their accomplishment here. This is
the
remarkable.
accomplishment here, though, is it's not just the silicon, because like you said, this is basically an A14, the X variant with ++, because it has Mac dedicated IP. But when you look at how clever they were, yes, there was all sorts of stuff that you can dunk on about how things like Catalyst were implemented over the last few years, and them getting rid of, they systematically took on a bunch of short-term pain, 32-bit apps. They deprecated a ton of stuff, but they got to a point where if you don't have any native apps, if you only have the Intel apps, you hit a button and it downloads and translates it. Doesn't emulate it. It translates it at download. Everything that is compiled, anything that's not just in time it'll do in real time. And then anytime that's updated, it'll redo the translation at launch. And then they feel like native apps. They don't get the acceleration that a truly native app does. They're not faster than you'd expect, but they run as expected. And when you look at Windows on ARM, or you even think back to PowerPC Rosetta, it is a sea change in how good they've gotten at making something compiled for x86 run on something compiled for Apple Silicon. That you barely notice, even on cranky apps like the Adobe Suite, you really barely notice. Yeah. I have to use, because my codec for my Canon camera that I shoot with is Rosetta. It's running, the codec is running in Rosetta inside Final Cut, and it's as fast on this stupid MacBook Air, and I use that term lovingly, as it is on my 16-inch MacBook Pro. I just don't like that the screen is smaller. That's my pain point now. Yeah, this is great, but my screen is too small.
So a number of people in the chat room are saying, well, how is it possible that Apple's doing something nobody else has done? And there's two things. The first one is, this has taken a long time. This is a decades or more work. But also, these other companies are hampered by, it's the innovator's dilemma. They're hampered by their existing platforms and an unwillingness to burn the ships behind them. In this case, Apple's burning its ships. They're saying all full speed ahead. And the commitment to doing that, yes, they're still selling Intel Macs, but you'd be at
I
this
still
point
can't combine my
nuts.
Apple IDs, Leo. Everyone has legacy debt.
There's some problems, I know. But legacy debt is not to be, and that's what Intel's next chip is going to be 14 nanometers.
Yes, with more cores and running at a higher voltage. Could you imagine when they went to Apple and said, hey, listen, that iMac you're building, you want to make it look like an iPad? Well, we're going to use a bigger chip with more cores and run it at a higher voltage just so we can say it's got 10% performance improvement. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
And then just imagine Tim Cook's face.
So I think some people in the PC world are saying, well, okay, but so what? I don't mind. It's plugged in. I don't mind using more power. But there are other advantages to being low power.
Yeah. Performance.
If you're using a laptop, the chances of your i7 or i9 being throttled are very, very high. No one that I've read so far has been able to notice any throttling in these M1 chips at any temperature, right?
The Air has no fan, so if you get to about 9-10 minutes, it'll start to ramp down very slowly. You get to about 30 minutes, you get maybe 5% to 10%. Okay. The MacBook Pro will just turn the fan on almost inaudibly, and it will not down ramp at all.
That might be why you want the Pro or the Mini, because you have the active cooling. Eliminates any
if you're doing 10-minute plus workloads, for sure.
Right. You excited, Laurie?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
I think people know me well enough. I'm not a fanboy. I'm not going to squeeze just because Apple came out with something. But I am a technology fanboy and a desktop computing fanboy, especially a desktop computing fanboy.
Too low. Terrain.
Laptops in there.
Too low. Terrain.
I'm a desktop stand.
Too low.
And I want to see progress in the desktop, and I've been, as many of us have over the last few years, disappointed by Apple's seeming lack of commitment to Mac, the kind of the absolute stasis on the Intel side. They haven't done.
Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain. Too low. Terrain.
Make left downwind runway 6
Too low.
Romeo
Terrain.
November India
Too
Echo
low.
Alpha minus.
Terrain. Too low. 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 Terrain.
Diamond Air 819er, exit runway when able. Diamond Air 819er.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Greg here, and Apple just announced a brand new line of computers with their own custom and is currently capable of these new Macs. But no, ultimately, that I do recommend you wait for the full
anything really interesting in chips in a long time. AMD's Ryzen, that was pretty exciting, but it's still an x86 64 architecture. I feel like we were living in we were frozen in amber in the PC marketplace for a decade.
And the phones and the tablets.
Hey guys, what's up?
all the-
It's Carl here, back with another episode and continuing on the Apple train this week as they released 3 new products. We first had the MacBook Air, which had desktop. So you can see here, Mac Mini on the box, it's remained the same as last year, and like I said, it's even the same form factor. We've just got the standard box. As it is the Mac Mini, nothing else is included, it's just the computer. You need to grab your own keyboard and mouse. This guy actually slides out this way. So you can see the Mac Mini up top, and we will do some more ASMR magic.
1,000.
So here is the Mac Mini in a nice space gray finish. You can see that the Apple logo is in the darker, almost black chrome. We've got the power output, Ethernet, 4 USB-C ports, HDMI, 2 USB-A ports, and the good old headphone jack. And other than that, we've got a very smooth piece, an expensive piece of aluminum. The rest of the box designed by California in Apple, very standard stuff. We've got our good old user manuals and unfortunately just standard white stickers we can get by. And we just have the good old power cable, and that is essentially the unboxing. And the machining on Apple products is second to none. It looks great, it feels great, it feels like a solid block of aluminum. But like I said, if we bring last year's model up, these are virtually the exact same device. There is no difference from what I can tell aesthetically, and if I mix these up, I probably wouldn't tell you which is which unless I plug them in. We'll take my space gray sticker from my MacBook Air. Boom. So this is the old one, I know because it has the sticker. This is the new Mac Mini. So who is this device actually for, and what's changed this year? We now have double the storage in each of the models. I know it isn't anything too crazy. So the base end, which retails for $800, you now get 256 gigs of storage. The $1,100 one, that will start off at $512. They're also now made out of 100% recycled aluminum, just like a lot of their products, so that's always good. But essentially, that is the Mac Mini. So I am technically able to review this guy as my last gen model that already had 256 gigs, and it's now the same device. So the Mac Mini is for someone that knows they're going to be sitting at a dedicated desk. As it is technically a desktop, the portability of this, even though you could stick this in a backpack, it doesn't have that same form factor as a laptop. You can't use it on a battery. When you compare this to, say, the MacBook Air, $800 versus $1,000, we have a fully mobile device. You can use this essentially anywhere. Yes, the Mac Mini does have better specs, but it also has the older chipsets. It's got the 8th gen Intel Core processors, whereas the new MacBook Air has the 10th gen. And I don't really think upping the storage to 256 makes a big difference anyways, because most people with dedicated desktops will end up having an external hard drive, stick one into the USB-C port, and you can get double, triple, quadruple the storage for half or a third of the price of what Apple is offering. With that being said, I still think there's a bit of value for Mac Minis. You do need extra peripherals, and I don't think everyone needs a dedicated, say, iMac to run in their setup. You do need to have a mouse, keyboard, and monitor. I'll go through some of my recommendations. For keyboard choices, I've kind of pulled two. If you are in the Apple ecosystem, you may already have an iMac Pro, so this keyboard works totally fine. I am still a number pad fan when I'm doing my finances. I think that they're a bit easier to work with. And my second recommendation is the Logitech MX Master Keys. I don't think it looks as good as the Master Food got by a previous gen model. Have that you can do on the Mac Mini, isn't a reason in its own to upgrade. And everything that you can do on the storage gold stickered version, a non-mobile setup, will you always be at your desk? I would personally grab the MacBook Air, and if you already have a previous gen Mac Mini, like my good old stickered version, you don't need to upgrade to the 2020 model. Having that extra storage space isn't a reason in its own to upgrade. And everything that you can do on the Mac Mini, you can
all the spotlight, all the attention, and now finally it's back. Like the Mac is doing it again. It's amazing.
I think this from the point of view of somebody who's a desktop stan, this is really, really important. Now, it's bad news for Windows stans and Intel stans because it's Apple only, and I don't see any reason to think that any of these advances will migrate over to the other side. Will they? I don't see how they can.
Absolutely not. It's not just the chip fab. It's that Apple, it's legitimate for people to complain, developers to complain about the control that Apple has over developers. However, it does benefit consumers because they can pull off things like this. They can make an environment in which you are at a Darwinian inflection point here as a developer. If you support the new M1 chips, you will continue to thrive and survive. If you decide that you're not going to do that, or if you stop development of your app a couple of years ago, your app is just not going to be able to compete with any other app that does support it. And on the Windows side, Microsoft, nobody has the ability to tell all of its developers, we have this brand new architecture. It's going to give at least 10 years of performance and superiority to our platform, and we are going to make you do this. They're going to say, yeah, nice story. We're going to continue to our own development cycles on our own time. So it's a completely holistic approach. It's possible that there's such a thing as a benevolent dictatorship, and Apple is the example of that.
Microsoft today announced the Pluton chip, which is a joint venture with AMD, Intel, and Qualcomm to do a T2-like coprocessor. They are years behind. Let's just face it.
That was 2016.
Let's just face it. And even if they do things like this, it's going to be a hodgepodge of different companies, all working with different economic, business goals. It's just not the same. And now,
some people will like it, though.
Some
people will prefer it.
Yeah, okay, but admittedly, I don't like the walled garden ecosystem lock-in that Apple is benefiting from here. I don't like that. But honestly, this is the upside to something like that, is that you can say, no, you're going to do it this way. Everybody's going to do it this way. This is our walled garden. You don't like it, go over there and use Pluton. Because that's...
Well, no, but for like 80% of the market, maybe a little bit more, this is a great solution. It's basically appliance computing. It's like a Chromebook.
Ground Ernie A Echo Romeo November India Echo Alpha minus, could you please send a fuel truck?
Ernie A Echo Romeo November India Echo Alpha minus, a fuel truck is on the road.
Ground Ernie A Echo Romeo November India Echo Alpha minus, could you please send a ground power unit?
Ernie A Echo Romeo November India Echo Alpha minus, the ground power unit is on the road.
Chromebook that can do way more than a Chromebook can do. So if all you want is a computer that's fast, has great battery life, and you don't have to worry about it, which is what a lot of people want, this is great. If you are a hobbyist or enthusiast or pro, or you want to run homebrew, or you want to do any of other things, you are going to legitimately, rightfully hate this, and you're going to look elsewhere.
Am I?
For your computing. I think, unless you really, really want the Apple stuff, I think a lot of people, there's just people who want to be able to change their RAM, and they want to be able to, like,
no, I don't care about that.
Linux.
But I want to use Homebrew. I want to use Unix. I want to use a command line. I want to do development. I mean, Xcode runs light years faster on this. I can't wait to try.
You can do all of that.
I can't wait to try some of my open source development tools on here. Emacs is going to run fantastic on this.
Yes.
I don't feel like I'm going to say, oh man, I better go get my Linux box because I can't use Emacs. It's not that way. Python's going to run faster. Everything's going to run better on this, right?
You'll just have to turn off SIP if it annoys you. That's like that's your new chore. And if you want to run stuff,
integrity protection. And this is, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on this because we talked about it on Sunday on Twit, and there's more information about this. But Apple has now changed how kernel extensions work. They've changed how firewalls work. You are in you're kind of in a lockdown environment. But I still don't feel like why did you say Homebrew? Am I going to have a problem with Homebrew?
No, I just think philosophically those people dislike, I don't want to say those people, like philosophically there's a bunch of people who really believe in like the essence of hobbyist computing, where you give me the atoms and that is the extent of our relationship. I am done with you, sir,
There are people who will buy the Pine laptop because it is completely open, and I completely support that. I have a core
unencumbered Linux, right?
Yeah, I have a core boot Linux box that's completely open. It's not a great experience. And ultimately, at some point, even if you are that kind of a geek, you want a good desktop experience. There's no reason you should have to crank your engine with a hand crank to drive your car.
But you want to complain while you're doing it, Leo. That's the thing, is if we give them the Mac, but they can complain about it on Twitter, they get the best of both worlds.
I understand. I'm not a fan of proprietary, but sometimes proprietary wins, and you gotta acknowledge the advantage that the proprietary ecosystem that Apple's built has. Then there's some issues. For instance, there are people already. I can't remember where I read this. Maybe it was on The Verge, but running iOS apps on M1 laptops works, but is ugly as sin.
Depends on the app. Yeah.
You're probably going to want to use Catalyst still, even though you don't need to use Catalyst if you're taking an iOS app and you want to make it available on macOS. Is that right?
There's two big problems. One is that a lot of the apps that people thought they'd be able to run, like Instagram, finally will have a native client for Instagram or something. They're not allowing it. So you get the instant.
But that's up to Facebook. That's not up to Apple. That's Facebook's decision.
But it's still user frustration. Like
by default, you have to actually opt out of it. By default, you are going to run, right? You don't have to do anything.
I'm not sure if it's opt-in or opt-out, but I know a lot of the bigger apps where they really want people to go to their websites because they want all the stuff that comes from having them click into their websites are not allowing it to run natively on these.
So for their business reasons, they're not going to allow it.
Yes.
But most iOS apps, if they don't do it, it's my understanding, if they don't do anything, they'll just run. The problem is they don't run full screen.
Well, some do. Anything that was made, it's the same old problem. Anything that was made by a developer who cares about, or like, I don't want to say cares about, but if you have the luxury of doing your app using all of Apple's frameworks, everything they give you, it's like a few minutes. Like if Cable Sasser says it took me like 10 minutes, he really means that. But there's some companies that, their product managers said you have to use OpenGL, you have to use these things. Like Nile said, the HBO Max app won't go full screen. All the apps made with UIKit will go full screen, but HBO Max did what HBO Max is going to do. So now you're stuck in a little window. Yeah. And that kind of thing's going to take a while for them to get best practices going.
Okay. So it may not be, but I never expected it would be this perfect experience of just taking all my iOS apps. They are available anyway, and you could. Big Sur.
Well, indie developers just ran circles around the big companies, of course, like usual.
There's so much more to talk about in this. And this could be a 10-hour show easily. So I just want to pick the highlights. Rosetta 2 is working well. You said no flaws, no crashes, no.
I'm sure there will be. I like everyone uses different apps, and I got a lot of people asking if I could test really niche apps. So I'm guessing that the development houses where they care a lot and they did a lot of good work, they'll run fine. And there might be some stuff that had a bunch of really ugly workarounds at some point that give you trouble. I haven't had any yet. It's been really good.
I have to say, it feels like good news that Adobe's already saying Photoshop for M1 native is in beta. That Lightroom is already native. The World of Warcraft is native day one. That's encouraging because it means that developers who want it to run on natively on an M1 can do a universal binary and it works. Right?
This is I think the M1 chip is actually going to be really big for Mac development. I think the Mac has kind of been an awkward situation for developers that are developing for PC and for Mac, and Mac tends to be like, well, we'll get around to Mac because it's kind of a pain in the butt. There's companies.
It's also a small market share. I mean, it's
right.
Economically, it may not be sensible to spend time on the Mac platform.
Now we're looking at a process that not only will it just be easier, it's from what I understand, it's very easy to make your apps universal, in other words, making them compatible with M1. It's very, very easy to do. And this also is opening up the door in a lot of ways for consumers to want a Mac and therefore want all the apps that run great on PC to also run great on Mac, but also for developers to actually have reasons to want to develop more for Mac and to improve their apps for Mac because the performance is so much better. So it's just going to be better in a lot of situations. I think I think what we're seeing today is a pathway down Mac development becoming as ubiquitous as iPhone and iPad development, and therefore will also become a problem for Apple in the future because they will sort of have a monopoly on apps that are being developed for computers, and there's going to be lots of companies who are feeling like Apple is taking away their rights and